My humanities moment occurred when I was 33 years old. Back, I even had hair in those days. It was 1982. I read a book that, though I didn't know it at the time, changed my life. I was working as the chief of staff to Governor Hugh Gallen at the time, and a friend gave me a copy of Bernard DeVoto's one-volume edition of the Journals of Lewis and Clark. At the time, I knew virtually nothing about them, just some vague memories from my Iowa history classes in grade school where I grew up. They had traveled across the continent. They had a dog with them. At some point along the line, an Indian woman joined them. And of course, the really important significance of their journey was that it touched Iowa half a century before Iowa became a state. To be honest, I'm not sure why I even started reading DeVoto's edition. My job kept me pretty busy, but once I did, I was fascinated by it. Lewis, I learned, had been the young private secretary of President Thomas Jefferson, more or less the same post that I held with Governor Gallen at a similar age as mine. The journal excerpts DeVoto included in his book let Lewis's own words and those of other expedition members describe their adventure and gave powerful immediacy to the story. The vastness of the Great Plains, the amazing wildlife that was new to science, the rigors of a North Dakota winter, the hard crossing of the Rocky Mountains, and the relations with the Indian tribes who played a crucial role in the expedition's success. And there were times when Lewis's entries exposed a young man who was filled in equal measure by ambition and self-doubt. I thought I recognized something in that. Equally fascinating to me were DeVoto's editorial sections between the selected journal entries. In vivid prose, he described the Louisiana Purchase and Jefferson's vision of a democracy that might someday reach the Pacific in terms of its international geopolitical significance, and how without the purchase, the United States might just as easily become merely one of many nations on the continent, more or less the Brazil of North America. In that, he awakened what I had been learning in my own way in the State House. Then in politics and governance, you make decisions every day, hoping for some future outcome that might not occur without your own effort. And that, I realized at that moment, that is the stuff of history. Not a recitation of facts and dates, but a story of people, fallible human beings, doing things without the certain knowledge, only the hope of success. Nothing is inevitable. We point toward a distant horizon, struggle every day toward it, and have to be prepared to adjust when our expectations are proven wrong, just as Lewis and Clark had to constantly adjust when those western mountains that in myth were supposed to be no bigger than the Blue Ridge turned out to be, well, they turned out to be the Rocky Mountains. And the easy one-day portage between the Missouri River and the Columbia, the fabled Northwest Passage that had been every explorer's dream since the time of Columbus, well, that turned out to be several hundred miles of an ordeal in September snows. But as the most often used quote in the journals said over and over again, we proceeded on. That fall of 1982, Governor Gallen lost his bid for a third term, and a little more than a month later, he died. I was devastated. Much more by his death than the election. And I wanted to do something, anything I would say, to get away from New Hampshire. A friend of mine arranged a meeting with the editor of the Boston Globe Sunday magazine, and as a former reporter myself, I suggested a few stories I might do for them. One of them, to be honest, I no longer remember what the others were, was that I would retrace the route of Lewis and Clark and report back on what I discovered 180 years in their wake. Though the sum of my knowledge was really my reading of that single book, I faked it a lot. That's not new for me. I did pretend to know more, and to my surprise, he liked the idea, and he sent me out. And the rest, as we say, is history. That journey and the story I wrote led to my first book. Being a historian up to that moment had never been even remotely an ambition of mine. But traveling across our glorious landscape, getting to know the stories of the people we call Americans, whose lives have been inextricably connected to that land, all that opened new horizons for me. I wrote more books that combined journalism and history. My good friend Ken Burns and I discovered we shared a mutual passion for the nation's past and in telling its stories. And somehow I ended up working with him on documentary films. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was inevitable. But as Bernard DeVoto's book first showed me, I don't think so. Nothing about history, nothing about our lives is inevitable. We get up each morning, perhaps with grand plans about what that next horizon will bring us, but it's the struggle and it's the uncertainty that defines us and that creates what we look back upon and call history. We proceed on. Anything history teaches us can happen and can change our direction in our lives, including the reading of good book. Thank you.